a chapter when Clay and I sat down in early 2023, we were talking about the fact that we obviously have this deep appreciation for American whiskey. But if we want to be able to not just sip bourbon, if we want to be able to live this element of lore, adventure, and this kind of experiential side of what American whiskey could represent to us as fans that have been around whiskey for a lot of years, what would that look like, right? And I would say ultimately it came down to could we bring this community together of enthusiasts, of collectors, of connoisseurs, and create these unique experiential kind of environments or activations where we're able to experience American whiskey in a whole different way that maybe wasn't being offered in a traditional visitor center environment at a distillery in Kentucky. And that was honestly kind of the beginning of what we were dreaming about. And then ultimately, there was another component, which was we've had this fortunate opportunity to sip on, for the better half, I would say, of a century of different American whiskeys, from Clay's collection to mine to the experiences we've had. So, how do we take some of that level of expertise and some of those incredible bottles that we've tasted and find a way to be able to maybe team up with a few distilleries and bring some unique expressions to life that could maybe potentially become some of the legends of today, as we have obviously some key chapters and iterations of American whiskey where we feel like some of those legends of yesterday were absolutely outstanding. How can we bring maybe some of those back to life with certain distilleries? So,
Mm.
um, Clay, I mean, I don't, thoughts on your side, brother?
Yeah, I mean, so much for us was also just this belief that, bourbon has an amazing history, but also, these days we are, I think, in another golden age of distilling. And there's some amazing whiskey out there, not just from the big distilleries, although they're making amazing stuff, but also from, several of the, let's say non-legacy distilleries, whether they're in Kentucky or Wyoming or wherever. And so in addition to creating partnerships with some of the leading legacy distilleries, we also wanted to go out and find out, who are the people out there who are making, new lore, who are telling the stories and creating the whiskey that we want to be associated with, so we really kind of laid out a two-track approach in that regard.
Well, yeah, and I flipped open the book here, right? We talk about old lore, right? Like A Church 16, right? This is like the grand poobah of whiskey that a lot
Yeah.
of people will try and have, and I've been lucky enough to have it actually in the Bardstown Bourbon Company's tasting room
Oh
with
yeah.
the Hirsch team. So I've been lucky enough to unpack this bottle and talk about old lore there. But like the new lore you mentioned, whether it's outside of Kentucky, where a lot of great producers are, but understanding like there's great whiskey in Colorado, Wyoming, Texas, Arizona, Pacific Northwest, right? It's all over America now, and we've expanded to 3,000 distilleries, and so there's a lot of new stories to tell as we go back. And I agree with you, a new golden age for whiskey in America.
Yeah, and one another thing is, I've spent a lot of time in sort of the single malt Scotch space, and I love
Hmm.
single malt Scotch. But one thing that has become apparent over the last 10 years, let's say, is, prices for American whiskey are going up. I've always felt that the quality of American whiskey is as good as single malt Scotch, but the context around it, the justification, the explanation for why does American whiskey justify, and I don't, price is a silly sort of proxy. It's not just about the price, but why does it deserve the respect that
Mm.
someone might in the past have given exclusively to single malt Scotch? And so I think that's another sort of, you know, guiding light for us is to help really underline why American whiskey is so great, not only the heritage but also the quality and the just the exceedingly high standards that even today's producers bring to their product.
Yeah, no, I think that that's completely right. And uh, Kentucky and Scotland, very similar in a lot of ways, but
Mhm.
completely different in a lot of other ways too, right? The way the whiskey is made, and a little thing called prohibition just kind of kicked us in the teeth a little bit.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, it's hard to imagine what it would be like without that, where
yeah,
we would be.
for sure. Maybe these bottles would have been more readily available, and Mason wouldn't be the only cool guy with all the 2,000 bottles behind him.
Yeah,
Um, so Mason, you have this idea of telling the story, right?
yeah.
But what's the story of the first one or the first lot of bottles that got you so interested into the American spirit?
Yeah, it's a great question, and quite a few people have asked, what is the deal? Like, where and how did this affinity and this passion for American whiskey come from? And I've shared, Clay and I've talked about it quite a bit, but I think ultimately it's helpful to know I think there's key places, moments, or people that have had an impact or an influence on you in your journey. And for me, our family has been in Arizona for a long time, right? Since territorial days. And we had a cattle ranch that we settled in the 1800s up in the northeastern part of the state. And our original family homestead is still there. But I had this unique upbringing where basically I was raised in an antique shop, Country Emporium. And when your bedroom window literally looks into an antique shop as a kid, and you've got a dirt parking lot and stagecoaches and wagons, and obviously you can see some of that in the book, right, with
Yeah.
Country Emporium in there. I mean, I didn't necessarily realize it at the time, uh, to the entirety that I do today. But when you are continuously having someone come into, your life and into your home, sharing something they have a deep passion for, that isn't just a product or something that they want to sell for a certain level of margin, but really it's been something that's been a part of their family's journey, their legacy, their history, and they're so proud to have the heritage and the history live on, but also this like element of the lore or the story behind, this wasn't just a saddle. This was a saddle that was given to them by, the San Carlos Apaches in the 1920s. And, there's great great grandfather won two rodeos with it in, Holbrook, Arizona. And like that lore around that particular saddle is what I fell in love with growing up in Country Emporium. And then ultimately, I would say the third piece for me was when you're traveling, because back then you had to pick, right? Like there was no internet. So you had to be literally an American picker, and you would drive around, to these cattle ranches that we go to old mining towns, to ghost towns, and the communities that are out there that truly welcome you in because you have something that you appreciate together, which is some of the history of that town or some of the families, some of the ranchers that are out there. I loved, right? So
Yeah.
when I first, I would say, started to experience the flavor palette of what American whiskey represented. It was in this, period around 2010. And it was really, I would say, a few key moments and expressions that were pivotal to me and like my change of, wait, I thought Scotch was pretty tasty, but this right here, because when you grow up on these ranches, let's just say, Jake, you're sipping a little Jack, a little Uncle Beam, a little kick of chicken, but that was about it, right? I used to make
Yeah.
country pops for my grandpa with a handle of Jim Beam that he'd keep in his toolbox in the back of Old Blue. But I had a Rittenhouse 21 year back in like 2000 and somewhere around 2012 at a restaurant in Portland called Urban Farmer. And I just remember being, just blown away. Like, just what is happening right now? Like, I cannot believe I'm tasting something that is absolutely extraordinary in the way that it is. And I'd say that 21-year Rittenhouse really started kind of this journey for me to understand what American whiskey can really represent and taste like. And then, it was a quick rabbit hole that I fell down from there.
It's an easy rabbit hole to fall down. And in 2012, when whiskey was readily available in America, right? You could go to CVS or Rite Aid. That's 2012. I had just turned 22. Date myself here a little bit. I'm obviously younger, but I could go in and I could get a bottle of Weller 12, $24 sitting on the shelf, and right next to it
Mm.
would be, old Rip Van Winkle. Got to, use the proper terminology here. I'm with the right people. So 10-year old Rip Van Winkle, and then lot B,
Yeah.
15 and 20. 23 would be hit or miss if it would be sitting in there on the top shelf, and they were all for like under $150, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
how things have changed in 13 years and how the American consumer has gravitated towards whiskey. And wanting to know about the American spirit. I think that is the most curious thing of all is how many people want to know about their granddad's pour,
Yeah.
or you
Mhm.
know, what is this legacy distillery? Why are people spending $9 billion a year to come to Kentucky to see this bourbon trail thing, right? It's just it's an insane thing that's happened in the last 13 years that I never thought I'd see take off here in Kentucky, to be honest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah. I mean, Clay's been around and written about quite a few different chapters and eras, but it's extraordinary, and I think we should be all incredibly grateful and proud of a spirit that has done what it's done in the last 10 years. So,
Yeah. Clay, from an editorial perspective, I mean, you've covered whiskey for quite a while. You know, what's it like for you to see this age of growth and change in the American spirit from, you know, six heritage distilleries, you know, not too far long ago to now over 3,000 here in America.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I take away most from covering the industry for so long is just humility, because at many points I thought things can't get any bigger or better or more expensive or more fun or whatever. The boom is going to end, the bust is coming. I've thought that for a long time, repeatedly being proven wrong. And so, what's I think just to me, that's I'm happy to be wrong. I'm happy to have things continue to go well. And I mean, it I think really speaks to a certain renewed appreciation for just American craft and the values and standards that go into that. So much of what we consume these days, even our food, is comes from overseas or is made in an industrial process. And so to have something like whiskey, American whiskey, that is made in exacting standards and made in places that have legacies connected with them, I think is just so it's in a weird way new to people, because
Oh,
it's people are not used to that, but they're also, I think most Americans are aware that that's how things used to be, and that there is um pride to be taken in having something that's American made, that's quality. And so the launching point for that then becomes, let's find out more about it. And so I
yeah.
think that's been the engine for so long, that I've watched and been able to be a part of, and it's just it's a wonderful story to be listening to and to helping to write.
Yeah, I mean, and the crazy thing is distillation, you know, if you look at the beams, right, goes back to the birth of our country, right? Like, you know, that's how heritage this idea of American whiskey, now bourbon, right, has been as a pivotal role in who we are as a country, which I find to be, you know, the most interesting fact of it all. As a bourbon or as a history guy myself, I feel like it's kind of cool to see this product intersect with so many pivotal moments in
Yeah.
American history.
Well, and if you ever want to really piss off a Scotch fan, remind them that Scotch as an aged product is not older than bourbon. I mean, both of them, before the early 19th century, were unaged products. I mean, bourbon didn't exist, and what we think of as Scotch, or what was made there, was, mostly unaged whiskey.
Yeah.
And it was only in Scotland, when production became legal, that they started to store it in barrels and started to make an aged product. So what we know as Scotch is a relatively recent creation, and jaws will drop and words will be exchanged, but it's incontrovertible. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I've had that argument a lot.
Yeah. I mean, distillation's been around for a very
Oh
long
yeah.
time,
Oh, they've been making stuff longer than anyone in the US for sure, but what they made
yeah,
is a different thing.
for
yeah.
sure.
And I think, Jake, for me, similar is like there's this element of when you have the ability to hear some of the history associated with, for me, growing up in the American West and the Southwest with Western Americana and Native Americana and mining relics, like there's this level of enjoyment that I find the more that you learn, right? And the more that there's kind of this educational component, it's not just that, I'm buying something transactionally to fill a spot in my house, right? Like these pieces represented something that they now, as a new steward of that saddle, we're going to tell the lore associated with that piece to their friends. And like you can see the enjoyment and like the excitement around that. I find bourbon the same way for me. Like honestly, like the more, whether you think about the history, you think about the certain expressions, the distillers, I love having that level of, I would say newfound knowledge in some of these, kind of eras and chapters of American whiskey that then you get to share with your friends that come over and, get to experience it for the first time with you.
100%. I mean, that is the middle of what we try to do is, um, if we have it, we should drink it. We should try it. There's special things for special moments, right? I held my first bottle of Old Rip Van Winkle 10 for the birth of my son. And that's how, we enjoyed that. Anyone who came over and met my son for the first time over the course of a couple years, like, people would come in, I would save just one sip. We weren't drinking that, randomly. Um, my daughter's name's Penelope Rose, right? And Penelope Bourbon has a rosé cask finish. And so that's how we introduced the name of our baby girl to our parents. And so like those are cool things that have intersected
Yes.
my life from a whiskey perspective. Now, I will say my son's name is Jameson. It had nothing to do with the Irish whiskey, but it is spelled the same way. So, I like to say I have a whiskey family from a naming perspective. And so I think it's really cool. Whiskey can tell a story in a variety of ways. It could be deeply personable, or it could just be, that one time I had a really good drink of whiskey. I couldn't tell you what it was, but I had a great conversation with Mason and Clay, right?
Yeah,
That
exactly.
could also be a bonding point as well.
Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
memories, right? And I mean, that's when we started, essentially Ashton and I, my wife and I started hosting some of we had a healthcare company for many years and I'm still affiliated with it today called Odyssey. But when we started hosting our doctors, I wanted to be able to pour them something and to create those moments where like you slow down a little bit to be present just enough to be able to actually hopefully authentically and genuinely connect with a guest in your home
Yeah.
versus going to some traditional business dinners where it's like, you're ordering the steaks, you're getting the wine, having a cocktail, sharing with them your business model. We'll be in touch. We'll shoot you an email, right? And then you leave. Well, we invited them into our home and, I love to garden. I love to cook. And so we kind of, had this thing where we bring people up to the theater room where we had a saloon and, get into the lore of the American West and tell the lore of America's spirit. And it was, there was a lot of Woodford getting poured, a lot of Jack Daniels getting poured. Like it wasn't like there was, a bunch of 16-year Hershes getting, opened. But it was the moment to be able to connect with somebody and share something that you're deeply passionate about. And I think that's, and hopefully in life, like people ask, like, do you consider yourself a collector? Do you see, consider yourself a connoisseur? And I'm like, I really consider myself an enthusiast, which means that there's things that I'm deeply passionate about. I
Yep.
invest in those passions personally and professionally. And then I want to share those passions, right? Like I love the outdoors. I love family. I love history. I love American whiskey. And so I think if you have something that you feel that level of true passion and joy, for, then I also think you have an opportunity and a right to make sure that you share it as freely as you can, right? And that's an element of what we're doing here with Bourbon Lore.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that is true. Like we live in a society that's go, go, go. And to create those moments where you slow down, I think is vitally important. And slowing down also, you have to slow down to understand, what are you going to be enthusiastic about next from a hunt of whiskey perspective? So I have to ask this question. There's stuff in here I have frankly never even heard of, sniffed at, known what. Was there a distillery attached to this or not? Right. Um,
Yeah, still to be determined with
yeah.
some, but
But curious, what was the one that was like the golden unicorn for right now that you tracked down?
mm,
Huh. You mean of a contemporary, a relatively recent bottle, or
Or any of these? I mean, there's 300 plus bottles in here, and there's you all have, is there one that comes to mind of like if you are truly enthusiastic about this and you're really kind of working at it, what would be and it doesn't have to be the most rare bottle, but what was your golden goose?
I mean, speaking personally, I think there are a couple of bottles from the 19th century in there.
Yeah.
And, I guess that's unicorn of unicorns. But to me, as items of history,
Yeah.
those are just amazing, amazing bottles. The Green River, that back then would have been a relatively common bottle to find on the shelf if you were around 130 years ago. But it's so well preserved.
Yeah.
You can look at that and think this is exactly what someone would have purchased back then. And truth be told, we have not opened that bottle. That is so untasted, but it has a great reputation. Someday we will, and I'm extremely excited about that because that all the bottles in the book are pieces of history. But to me, that's a piece of history that really speaks to me, especially because now the Green River Distillery is back up and running and has a heritage that they've grabbed onto. And I think it's really cool to see Green River today making really good whiskey and using some of the same facilities to the extent that they can, and connecting with this heritage that, frankly, I think was largely forgotten because the Green River brand disappeared. So that's just a really cool then to now to, bridging the heritage. I don't know, you can spin it however you want, but to me that bottle really jumps out.
And who wouldn't want to drink a whiskey without headaches? I mean, come
Yeah,
on.
right. I mean, what a great brand. You
Yeah.
couldn't put that on a bottle now, but hey,
No.
back then, sure.
I mean, A+ for that marketing person.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I was in Portland at a conference with Nike a couple of weeks ago, and there's one of the top designers in the United States called Tinker Hatfield, and he played a big role in the Jordan brand in launching that. And I was dropping off a book with somebody there, and he stopped me, and we're looking through the book, and he's like, "These labels you're telling me these are from like the late 1800s, early 1900s?" And it was cool to be with a bunch of designers that were, just fascinated with the brand design of what some of these. And I think that was kind of the other piece with the book. Like when we talked about this as a fan, right? When I wanted to learn more about a particular chapter, era, or certain bottles, I naively thought I could call the distillery. And so I did, right? Like I'd contact the distillery and be like, "Hey, I'm out here in the Pacific Northwest. I've heard about this bottle. Do you have an archive or an email database where you could send me some information, just some photographs? Because I can't seem to find any photographs of this bottle." And they passed me through like 6 or 7 different people, and finally, after like being on the phone for an hour, they'd be like, "What are you talking about? No, we don't have any photos of that bottle, sir. Like, I don't even know like what that bottle is." And I was always so surprised that for our spirit, right, for something that we're so proud of as a country, where is some of that detail, right? Where is some of that historical, kind of knowledge? Where is that photography? Where, like, do these bottles exist or do they not, right? And then when one of them would kind of finally come across, my plate, I'd be like, it does exist, right? And and then when you would open it, I'd be like, this is freaking incredible, right? How do you share that, right? How do you ensure that it doesn't just get lost? And no one ever has the opportunity to see that bottle in its truest, purest form. And so when we talked about the book, for me, sincerely, like I shared with Clay, like as a fan, as a massive fan of American whiskey, we want something to where you can see and experience some of these legends from the last 100 years of American whiskey, to where, like Jake, we spent with a museum grade photographer. We thought it would take a month. We maybe underestimated the scope of the project, but we picked out our 300 favorite bottles from the collection that to me meant something to us, and we wanted to narrow it down to the top 100, but we really couldn't. So we started with this top 300. That, just to shoot those bottles, took 5 months, Monday through Friday, from sunup to sundown, with a museum grade photographer set up in my garage. We literally took over the entire garage, 3-bay garage, and turned it into a studio. And he shot 9,000 unique images of just 300 bottles that have never been photographed at the quality to where we backlit every bottle, we bottom lit every bottle, we side lit every bottle, we top lit every bottle. So when you look at those pictures, there's no touch up, there's no Photoshop, there's no like, I mean, they're as real as it gets, meaning like we didn't, if there's imperfections in the glass, we want you to see that. Whatever the color of the liquid and the expression is, we truly want that to come out. If the glass is hand blown, we want you to be able to see the bubbles in the glass and where the seam is, right? Like all of that. So I'm not sure how I just got on that tangent, but it was like, for me, it was a passion of like, this is coming from a place to where we want these bottles to be able to live on and not just be lore, but to be hopefully shared in a way to where, for a reasonable price point, everyone could enjoy a little bit of this extraordinary collection, whether you can afford the bottles or not. Now you can bring them into your home and see them, right?
Yeah. I mean, my wife was just excited because this was a nice like piece that could go as a design piece in the house too. So like it was like a double whammy.
Yeah.
She's like, you brought more bourbon crap into the house.
Better than bourbon
check it
stones.
out.
And so that the answer is yes, but it's pretty. And you can do something with it.
Well, and like even like the design agency that we selected, right? This is one of the top design agencies in the US by the name of Lincoln Design. Darren Higgins was our photographer and stills a big part of Bourbon lore. One of the top illustrators in the US that works for Lincoln Design. Every chapter has a custom illustration to introduce that chapter. The cover, everything you see on the cover has meaning and purpose and symbolism to why we're pursuing Bourbon lore. Like this is a version of the old Winchester Western horse that when I turned 12 and passed my Arizona Game and Fish hunter education program, my dad gave me an old sign that was on porcelain from the 1970s. And I always thought like as a kid, this was some cool maverick. To the, upside down horseshoes for Cowboy Good Fortune, to the saguaros, for the Sonoran Desert that I know and love, right? For the old bottles I used to dig up in dumps, in the American West with my pops, the old whiskey bottles that we'd sell at the antique shop. So I think what you'll see from Bourbon lore, from Clay and I and the entire team is this is a commitment to ensure that we do our part. Everyone has the opportunity to bring a little bit of what they love about American whiskey to the table. And we hope to be able to do the same and continue to innovate and push the category in a beautiful way, right? In a very real way, to where the history, the provenance, the legacy should be, shared, documented, and curated for another generation to appreciate and fall in love with it. And so that's kind of, why we take the time to put together these experiences, these collaborations, right? Like we were talking earlier, Clay was referencing some of the new distilleries, right? And how many incredible, new brands have been able to come to life over the last 10 years outside of the state of Kentucky. Who would have thought a distillery called, Holiday in Weston, Missouri could be creating such an extraordinary expression with Kyle and his team over there. And so to have the opportunity to do that 18-barrel blend, I mean, we spent 2 days there, right? To go through 18 unique barrel experiences from all different seasons of distillate in their now almost 7-year, kind of 10-year, and have some of the first barrels that Kyle ever laid down. We have 2 of the first 20 barrels that he ever laid down in that 18-barrel blend, right? Like that to me, like that's creating something of heritage, meaning, and value, but with a brand that, yes, has history dating back to 1856. 18 for the first, 18 barrels for the 18 of 56. But like that's to me, like those are projects that we're proud to be a part of, and continue to help brands like Holiday and others push the envelope with doing some extraordinary things.
For sure. And that goes back to Clay's point, even about Green River. Like McCormick Distilling's been around for a very, very long time, right? So to see what they're now doing, and you said something about Green River, just to revisit that, but think about all the heritage and legacy that's come out of that distillation, right? Like, it wasn't just Green River. Well, Green River went away, and then, the Medley Distillery, like, really put out a lot of great whiskey. And some of that's articulated in this book even too. So Owensboro was a hub, right? We think about Bardstown all the time, but Owensboro from a whiskey distillation perspective, in the early 1900s was the spot almost. If it seems like the brands that came out of there that we know and love now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to see, does Owensboro continue to pick up the pace? I mean, other distilleries opening there. It's a nice little town,
Yeah.
right on the river. So yeah, I'm excited to see where the town might go.
For sure. No, there's a lot of cool things, and we've spent most of the time on the book, and the reason I spend more time on the book is because the book you can bring home to you. You
Yeah.
know, right? I get to have this. I don't have to go anywhere with it. I order it and it's mine, right? But you all do curate very high level experiences, right? And they are, you know, a vacation for most people, right? Monetarily speaking, on what they might commit to going to these. You've done one in Phoenix, you've done one at Heaven Hill, you're going to be doing one in Jackson Hole here later this year. So, if someone is interested in understanding what these experiences look like, can you unpack what all goes into an experience? And I know they're all different, but just at a high level, what would someone experience if they went to a bourbon lore experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, as someone who has spent 20 years in business and healthcare, traveling the country and putting on 46 live events a year, there's this element where we're always extremely busy in the way of like we go from our home to an airport, airport to a resort, maybe the resort to a restaurant, have a dinner, listen to a couple talks, go back to the property, and then you're flying back out, right? And so people are like, wow, you got to go to these amazing cities this year. And I'm like, not really, right? Like there's a level of transactionalism that's happening in I think some of our lives where it's just a lot of go, 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 busy, 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 work, work, work. And for bourbon lore, part of our aspiration was if we go to Kentucky, right, what else can there be that we can curate beyond maybe what's currently being offered, right? To have something that allows for you to be able to become really more immersed in this particular experience. And again, we know these experiences are a significant investment, right? And we respect and appreciate that not everyone will maybe have the opportunity to be able to do this. And so when we look at this, we try to create variations from what we're doing in Kentucky to what we're doing in Jackson Hole to what we're doing in Scottsdale. But to give you an example, like Jackson Hole, it's coming up here in July. When we look at Jackson Hole, we want to be able to bring out the physicalities of the environment, right? And so you have these incredible things in downtown Jackson Hole. You have this amazing place called the Grand Teton National Park in the Teton Valley. You have this incredible area called the Gros Ventre, and we're wanting to curate a memory that becomes something so extraordinary to where that memory stays with you, not just hopefully for weeks or months, but for years to come, where we create an element of lore in your journey through this adventure, where you now continue to have this gift that hopefully keeps giving for years to come that you share with everyone that you kind of come into contact with in some capacity when they ask you, what did you do last summer in July, or what did you do last summer? Well, let me share with you, I did something really extraordinary.
Yeah.
That to me is the gift, the experience, right? The product is awesome, and we're so proud of our collaborations and the releases and obviously the different distilleries that we're working with, but the experience is what we're chasing, right? And so when you look at Jackson Hole, like the Snake River Ranch is one of our experiences this summer. And it's a family held ranch that's been in the same family for over 130 years, right? It's 8,000 acres at the base of the Grand Tetons and on the Snake River. And so like it's not a ranch that's necessarily open to the public. It's a private family owned ranch, right? But we're bringing our guests to the north end of the ranch where they're gonna, meet the ranch family and talk through the history and the heritage of the Snake River Ranch. And after we get kind of a little tutorial of the ranch and take some side by sides out, we're then gonna basically put in some rafts on the north end of the ranch, and we're gonna have a float trip for 2 hours down the Snake River at the base of the Grand Tetons, throwing some lines in, talking to our guides, taking in hopefully some of the incredible wilderness, maybe seeing a moose or maybe seeing a grizzly there. You never know what you're going to come across in the Teton Valley. But we're going to end up pulling off on the south end of the ranch. And then our guests are going to get to experience this incredible fly fishing kind of tutorial and learn how to fly fish for a couple hours with some incredible wranglers. And then we have a ranch to table 7-course dinner experience, and David DeFazio and Wyoming whiskey, and we have a country artist coming out, and Those moments and those memories, right, of bringing in, the ranch, bringing in Wyoming whiskey, having the physicalities of these environments. Those are some of the adventures that we're chasing, and like the Heaven Hill experience. To have the opportunity when we talked about going to Kentucky, I mean, the Shapiras are an incredible family that have had such an extraordinary impact in American whiskey. And when you think about some of our favorite expressions, over the last, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, Heaven Hill is just, I mean, it's iconic, right? So to have the opportunity to help tell their lore, it also feels like a real honor for Clay and I and the Bourbon Lore team. And so I think what our guests appreciate is we're really about ensuring the lore of those that we're essentially wanting to amplify and help tell their story in an extraordinary way that maybe they don't necessarily get the chance to do as Heaven Hill in their visitor center every day to hundreds of people. But could they maybe, once or twice a year in this really special way, be able to share their family's lore and their appreciation for American whiskey in something that goes beyond the visitor center? And could Bourbon Lore be the entrusted, kind of friends and family to be able to help them do that? And that's where, kind of the heart comes from some of our experiences.
For sure. No, it sounds amazing. Where could someone who is very interested in this go to potentially sign up to be a part of one of these experiences?
Bourbonlore.com. It's the place. So we started sharing some of the collection on bourbonlore.com. So you'll see that there's a pretty extensive bottle gallery that Clay and I and the team continue to work on that's there. But we also have a section on the site where we really get into our experiences that we're hosting. And you can register there or request more information and get access to some of the program collateral.
And what about the book? Where can people find the book other than bourbonlore.com? Can they get it on Amazon or anything, or is it just only available there on the website?
It's it's available on Amazon. It's out in the wild in bookstores. I saw it this weekend at my local bookstore.
Nice.
And I think a number of distilleries carry it. So, find it wherever you find great books.
Yeah. And it's a hefty book. So
It is. It's a weapon.
Weighs almost 5 pounds.
Yeah, you will enjoy this. And I really appreciate you all coming on and talking about this and capturing history of whiskey, right, in a unique way for me, even as a person who gets to talk about whiskey and try whiskey in a variety of different modalities. Sometimes taking a moment to be able to unpack history in a very easy to understand way is very important. So I appreciate this as a consumer of the product and the ability to understand a little bit more about the history of the American spirit. So thank you all for your time and energy and effort in building this this book because I think this is, I'm sure there'll be rendition 2 and 3 down the line, but really appreciate the time and effort you all put into this.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you to say.
Yeah.
It's our pleasure. And, I think you'll see Bourbon Lore is great is greatly or I should say appreciates and excited about what American whiskey's been able to accomplish, but we're just excited about where it's going, right? And so if we could be a part of helping continue to evolve where American whiskey grows and the communities it reaches, then we're stoked and fired up. So thank you for including us today, Jake. We appreciate it.
Well, Mason and Clay, thank you as always for spending some time with us. Everybody, thank you for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. Again, if you want to know more about Bourbon Lore, go over to bourbonlore.com. You can follow them on social media as well. And if you want to know more about us, go over to Instagram, Twitter, X, I guess, and Facebook, YouTube as well, at Bourbon Lens. We'd love to have you join the conversation there. And until next time, cheers.